Okay, we're going to talk about proteins in this segment. Some general information about proteins. Let's title it so that when we look at it, everybody can see what's going on here. So some general information about proteins. Carbon-based, hydrogen still, oxygen still, new player to the game, nitrogen. So remember from our discussion about functional groups, key functional groups, here are amines, and the carboxylic acid. Thus, how we get the monomer. Amino acids. And when we put them together through a condensation reaction, or dehydration synthesis, or condensation synthesis, any of those terms, they all mean the same. We get what's called a dipeptide. I'll show you the synthesis of a dipeptide in a second, in a picture. And a dipeptide, a peptide bond, the word peptide is coming from the peptide bonds, which happen between the C and the N. And again, I'll show you the synthesis in a second. If I put together more than two and I add another one, then my polymer is called a polypeptide. Okay, so let's put the picture up and talk about protein synthesis. Okay, so, dog's barking all over the place. Sorry about that, guys. Hopefully it's not too loud and distracting. Okay, so what we have is one amino acid here. Whoops. Hang on a second there, guys. All right, now we're ready. So we have one amino acid here, and we have one amino acid here. Here's the amine group. Here's the carboxylic acid group. Over on the here, same thing. Here's the amine group. Here's the carboxylic acid group. Okay, so we're going to take water off. You can see they're taking the OH off of there and H from the amine group. That's our water that's released. And this bond that forms right there between the carbon here and there creates the peptide bond. And as you can see, what we get as a result is actually an amide in there. Just a reminder of amides and that they do exist. And that's the condensation reaction and how we get this is actually a dipeptide, but it's labeled there a polypeptide. If we kept going, we could continue to add them out this way. We continue to add them out this way, and that's going to be something we talk about in a few seconds about creating the structures of the proteins. I do want to add one little thing and then show you another picture in a second here. I want to talk about this guy here and this guy here. So when we were talking about functional groups, we called these guys just random carbons. And in amino acids, they are referred to as R groups. And they usually are random, combinations of carbons, but they can be sometimes it's just an H, as we've seen too before in a couple of different cases. But in amino acids, there are only 20 R groups. And I'm going to show you some of the amino acids because I think they're in your notes in a little bit. So therefore, there are only 20 amino acids in any living organism. That means it's the same 20 amino acids in the dogs that are barking in the background, the turtle that's swimming over in the tank to my left, the frogs that are sitting in the tank to my right, you, me, the cat that's downstairs, not making any noise, thank goodness. There are only 20 amino acids in all living organisms. It is the order that you put the amino acid in that creates the protein. And if you haven't already read the enzyme paper, after watching the protein videos, you'll be able to have a better understanding of that. And we talk about how proteins are going to come from the instructions that are on DNA. And you're going to read about that in that paper. And we're also going to talk about that when I do the DNA segment as well. So that's kind of why the proteins and us learning about proteins and their structure becomes pretty important. It's not the last time we're going to talk about proteins. We're going to do a whole nother portion of a unit on proteins, and they're going to come up in every chapter in different aspects. Which, let's talk about that next before I move to amino acids. So there are a couple of things that I want to talk about before we go into the structural stuff again. So kind of just give this as general information. Again, it's really the function of proteins. One thing that's different, except for when you look at cellulose, except for when you look at the phospholipid. But one thing that is absolutely positively clear when it comes to proteins is their function is directly related to their structure. We see that a little bit in a phospholipid. We see it in cellulose and carbohydrates, but sometimes, most of the time, our attention on those is breaking them down or that kind of stuff, or who they react or how they react. The fact that one is nonpolar, those are the different things that we kind of focus on when we're talking about the lipids and when we're talking about carbohydrates. When we're talking about proteins, really, we can't get away from that their function is directly related to their structure, or if you want to say it the other way around, their structure is directly related to their function. We're going to see that in the jobs that they do. The first thing that we're going to see them do that in, and it's also in the paper, is when they act as a biological catalyst. Also known as enzymes. And I am going to do a segment for you before finishing proteins that is going to be strictly about enzymes. But again, that's something we're going to come back and visit almost every chapter. We're going to talk about a different enzyme or the function of an enzyme or the lack of functioning of an enzyme. We're going to see them a lot. Those are proteins we're going to focus on all year long. The next one is that it could be structural proteins. Structural proteins like those that are in muscle fibers, called actin, or myosin. Structural proteins like keratin, which are in your hair or your nails. Those kind of proteins. We're going to talk about proteins that are involved in transporting material. Like cell membrane proteins. They get an entire chapter to themselves. And then finally, we're going to talk about proteins that are involved as messengers. Or signal receivers. So they're communicators. This is how cells are going to communicate to each other, to other cells in the body, to other molecules within them, within the cell itself. A lot of the times it's a protein that's doing this. So that's kind of an important piece I wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of a discussion on. Again, it's not something we're going to dwell on right now because we're going to see it in every chapter that we do from here on out, but I just didn't think it was right to kind of let it go and not talk about the fact that their structure is going to be important to their function, and those are the 4 different categories of functions that we are going to see proteins involved in. Okay, let's move on to the amino acids themselves. Okay, so we have a image here that has the 20 amino acids that are possible. And you can see that, again, the ones that are highlighted in colors, those are your R groups. So you have different R groups based on what's going on. This chart happens to divide the amino acid up into whether the amino acid itself is nonpolar, polar, or electrically charged. And if it's electrically charged, it basically means that it could have something there, or it could have the ability to lose it. For example, in this one here, this would be a carboxylic acid group if there was an H there. Okay. A lot of the times the H's are involved in other things, and so therefore the H is not available acting like a carboxylic acid. But there definitely then becomes the charge there because oxygen would keep that hydrogen's electron as he would go away as a proton, and this guy would find somebody else to pair up with, or some kind of other reaction, or it could be attracted, like if it was polar, and that type of thing. And so these are the 20 different types of amino acids, and you can see, like I said, you can range from it being just the H to it being these scary cyclic groups, a phenyl with an alcohol on it. We have all kinds of different combinations, but these are it. 20 amino acids for all organisms. That's it. 20 of them. That's all there is.